I'm going to put this down here to prove a point. All the footage is from my solo GM2, by the way. I think this is my new favourite build. It is constant ability spam, to the point where your combos feel like they can go on forever. And that's what I love. This is such an engaging build to use. There's always something that it can be doing. It feels like it never loses steam in fights, and no two combos have to be done the same way. It is such a refreshing playstyle compared to punch dodge builds. Apart from that, it's got some of the best feeling and cinematic looking gameplay you'll get. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't partly using this setup because of its style points, and as far as how strong it is, it's really, really good. Amazing crowd control that can be followed up with high damage AoE. It can play every range really well, it can do single target damage, ag clear, amazing survivability. It's such a well-rounded build that does everything you want amazingly. And a heads up, I'm going back on what I said in a community post. I am going to recommend a regular exotic here, but I cannot stress this enough. You will have a worse experience with the build, and it will be much less powerful if you're using the regular exotic, by a big margin. The class item brings so much to the build, and it really ties it together, and I'm recommending 3 class item roles too, so there's flexibility if you don't have the role I'm using in the gameplay. I really encourage using the class item over the regular exotic, and if by the end you think it's earned, any subs are super appreciated. Enough said, I won't keep you stuck in the intro, let's kick it off. The whole idea of the build is to be constantly freezing and then following up with ignitions. One of 3 ways we're getting to that freeze is through our melee Withering Blade. You throw a shuriken that can ricochet off of surfaces or enemies, and it applies 60 slow on hitting a target. This melee also comes with 2 charges at base and has virtually no cooldown between how long it takes to throw a shuriken back to back. The second way we're applying freeze is through Dust Field Grenade, which slows on landing, then creates a slowing field that lasts for 7 seconds. It deals a tiny bit of damage, but anything that stays inside the grenade will eventually get frozen. And lastly, we're taking Winter Shroud, which on dodging near an enemy, you apply 60 slow. But you also get the added benefit of when applying slow from any source, you get 300% base increased class ability regen for 3 seconds, and on dodging, you get a 50% damage resist for 4 seconds. Any one of these 3 abilities, combined with one of the others, is basically a guaranteed freeze. Shuriken Duskfield, Duskfield Winter Shroud, Shuriken Winter Shroud. You'll also be picking up Gambler's Dodge here to get back a melee charge on dodging near an enemy, and for your super, you've got a lot of flexibility. Pretty much anything can work here, but I was really enjoying either Silence and School, because it interacts nicely with Winter Shroud ability regen, Tether, as it sets up really easy freeze and ignitions, and Golden Gun was great too, just for boss damage settings, although Tether can also fill that role through its 30% weaken. For your second aspect, and where the build gets a lot of its ignitions from, you'll want Gunpowder Gamble. On getting solar kills, or ability kills, you charge up a meter. Weapon kills give 1 pip, and ability kills give 4 pips. On reaching 6 stacks, you get a grenade which causes an ignition. The Gunpowder Gamble acts at the same time like a grenade and an ignition, meaning any mods or fragments that use those words, grenade or ignition, can interact with Gunpowder Gamble. Our general gameplay loop is using a combination of freezing abilities together, and then the payoff being that our Gunpowder Gamble can really easily AoE down bunched up frozen targets, and this is where the Inmost class license is a must. Spirit of Inmost Light reads, when using an ability, empower the other 2, giving them empowered ability regen, and this can stack up twice. And as we've got abilities that have multiple charges like Withering Blade, with the Shuriken itself actually getting 2 times empowered on every hit it gets, or abilities that can be made out of thin air like Gunpowder Gamble, which procs the exotic perk, Inmost Light has pretty much constant fuel for 2 times empowered abilities across the board. We're always combining these abilities together, so the increased regen is always going to be at its upper limit. But as I said before, there's 3 roles you're looking for in the class item. Spirit of Inmost Light is always the first perk you're wanting, but then you can go for either Spirit of Certarachnes, Spirit of the Coyote, or Spirited Synthoceps. The way I like to think about these versions is that the Surturacne roll is best for survivability, with Woven Mail off Duskfield and Gunpowder Gamble. The Coyote roll is for even more ability spam, plus utility, and the Synthesept roll is the high damage setup. But if you don't have Woven Mail from Surturacne, these builds still have great survivability. Coyote, for example, benefits more from the Winter Shroud, 50% damage resist, because you have 2 dodges and more ready access to your Shuriken from Gamblers, which slows and procs Winter Shroud increased class ability regen, cycling back into that 50% damage resist. And with Synthesept, we can take Faceted Blessing to give us health regen on melee kills. These class item rolls are all similar in power. I would slightly put the Surturacne roll above the other two, but literally by a fraction. They're all still really solid and have their pros and cons over one another. For your regular exotic though, you're going to take the base 6th Coyote, which gives an extra dodge charge and passively gives a copy of Reaper. Again, in the clearest of possible terms, this is the worst choice of these 4 options, and I'd highly recommend using any one of the class item rolls I mentioned before, just because they are that much better. As for your fragments, I'm going to recommend some that I believe every single version of this build should run, then fragments I'd recommend if you're using a specific setup. Firstly, the most impactful fragment in the build is Faceted Ruin. This build lives and breathes shatters and ignitions, and this fragment buffs both of those, giving your ignitions a larger radius, and your shatters have an increased radius and do a second instance of shatter damage. For your shatters, you've got Duskfield, Winter Shroud, Hailfire, Withering Blade, they all get buffed. Then Gunpowder Gamble and Conditional Finality, if you choose to run it, get buffed too. Across the entire kit, you see benefits just from this one fragment. Next one I'd really recommend is Facet of Dawn, where powered melee hits give you Radiant, and powered melee kills give you and nearby allies Radiant. You've probably seen in the gameplay how many shurikens this build can make. It's a lot. Every one of those shurikens also now means a 25% weapon damage boost, which for just general gameplay or boss damage settings is huge, as well as it has anti-barrier from Radiant. Genuinely, you can get away with not having anti-barrier guns and solely relying on Radiant from shurikens to give you that buff. Next up is Facet of Mending, where grenade final blows give cure ×1, and while Transcendent, they give cure ×2. One thing I do have to say here is that this fragment is currently bugged. I'll pin a comment as soon as Bungie announces a fix, but at the moment, Mending is not proccing off of Grapple, but more importantly, not off Gunpowder Gamble. I'm still going to recommend it though, as getting this benefit during Transcendence already makes it amazing. But once that bug is fixed, and Bungie has openly acknowledged that it is a bug, because I literally asked them and they said, yep, it is, this becomes the most important fragment to have in the build. Your survivability is going to skyrocket once this gets patched. An absolutely mandatory fragment, and one I'll put above Ruin as soon as it's fixed. Facet of Hope is another great pick, where you get 60% increased base class ability regen if you have an elemental buff. Every version of this setup should be using Dawn for Radiant, so this will be uploads. Plus, if you're running the Surturacne roll, you have Woven Mail to constantly proc this too. Next is Facet of Protection. This seems to be a staple across a lot of the builds I do, but it's just such a hard fragment to not recommend. It's a free 15% or 32% damage resist, and this build absolutely can get up close to adds, so this DR will be up a load. The last fragment is where we're going to see some changes across the different setups. If you're running the Surturacne roll, you've got a lot of choices here. You can go for any one of the cooldown reducing fragments in Facet of Awakening or Facet of Balance. One of the more interesting flex pick here could also be Facet of Command, where on freezing or suppressing an enemy, you reload your equipped weapon and get other weapon benefits as well, and on killing a frozen or suppressed enemy, you spawn a status shard or a void breach. We're only benefiting from the status pass of this fragment, but it strikes a really nice balance between ability cooldowns as well as enabling better boss damage through auto reloads. You could also take Facet of Devotion, where defeating targets affected by a strand or stasis debuff gives bonus light transcendence energy. Sometimes this build can lack a little in the light transcendence energy, so this fragment is also a nice pick. If you're using Synthesept though, you're going to want to take Facet of Blessing here, which causes your melee final blows to start health regen, and whilst Transcendent, they cause health regen to start for you and your allies. Really importantly, it's not just powered melee final blows here. It can proc up shuriken kills, but even your base melee is going to kickstart your health regen, and you've got to remember that frozen targets take bonus unpowered melee damage, meaning if your shurikens don't kill, the unpowered melee kill afterwards, assuming they're frozen, should kickstart your health regen. And if you're running either version of the Coyote build, you're going to want to take Facet of Purpose here, where I'm picking up an Orb of Power, you get an elemental buff matching your equipped super. In the Coyote setup, we're building more into Reaper because of the extra dodge, so you'll get some survivability back through Purpose. Right, mod setup. On the helmet, you're wanting one Solar Siphon, or Harmonic if you're using Golden Gun, then one copy of Special Ammo Scout and Finder. You can also run Ashes to Assets here over Special Ammo mods for more super regen on grenade final blows, and if you're using the Syntheceps roll, hands-on could also be a good choice here. On your arms, you're going to want one copy of Focusing Strike, one copy of Bolstering Detonation, and one copy of Firepower. If you're using the Syntheceps roll, Firepower could be replaced with Heavy-Handed here too. If you're using the Spirit of Coyote though, on your arms you're wanting one Firepower, one Grenade Kickstart, and either Bolstering Detonation or a stat boosting mod. On the chest, you're going for either Resist mods or Reserve mods, and on the legs you want one copy of Recuperation, one copy of Better Already, and one copy of Stacks on Stacks. On the class item, you're wanting one copy of Reaper, one Bomber, and one Utility Kickstart. If you're using Spirit of the Coyote though, you're wanting double Reaper and one Bomber. And for your stat distribution, you should prioritize Resilience, then Mobility, then Discipline. Onto weapons. Before I go any further, Solar is absolutely the element you want. It innately charges up Gunpowder Gamble, so it's always the element you should have across your heavy and energy. There are some interesting choices here, but I have to spotlight one gun in particular because its synergy with the build is just completely unmatched. Conditional Finality is amazing here. For those who don't know, the gun holds 2 shots, and if you land enough pellets, the first shot freezes and the second can ignite. In 3 ways, this gun is great in the build. It uniquely benefits from Facet of Ruin, both in its solar and stasis shot, but more importantly, the shatter kills and ignition kills this gun can get are not counted as weapon kills, but ability kills, meaning instead of getting 1 pip for Gunpowder Gamble, you're getting 4, even though the source of the ignition and shatter would have been from conditional. And lastly, because ignitions are scaled up in damage by the source that created them, and because from Facet of Dawn we have loads of Radiant, the ignitions this deal are basically always damage boosted because of Radiant. Apart from conditional though, there's a bunch of other choices here that could work, namely anything that interacts with either ignitions for Facet of Ruin and Gunpowder Gamble, or slow and freeze to work with Winter Shroud and Gunpowder Gamble again. On the solar side, that could be Eriana's Vow, Polaris Lance, its Ergo Sun counterpart, Sunshot, Dragon's Breath, so on and so forth. For stasis, that could be Verglas Curve, Aga's Scepter, Wicked Implement, same thing. The weapon variety here can be really broad, but conditional would normally be my first pick. As for specific perks to keep an eye out for, the only really notable one to mention is Chill Clip, as it can prop Winter Shroud bonus ability regen. Apart from that, anything that sees meta-relevant use is going to be good here. Okay, I hope you got all of them. I'm going over seasonal mods next, so if you're watching this and it's not during episode echoes, then skip to the timestamp on screen. Otherwise, you're looking for 6 mods. I'm not going to do descriptions here, just give my recommendations, as people probably understand what's going on with seasonal artifact mods at this point. The first one you're going to want is Creeping Chill. It's really nice as we've got so much access to slow and freeze in the build. If you're using Shadow Shot, Void Hegemony could be useful. You'll also want to take Radiant Orbs here, which give you Radiant when picking up an orb. It's free Radiant, so it's kind of a no-brainer. And then Solar Fulmination, which causes your ignitions to do increased damage, and in an increased area of effect. Then lastly, you'll want to take Shield Crush and Transference, which both interact with Grenade and Melee. You could also go down a completely different route and build more into Scorching and Igniting with Snipers, in which case Incendiary Rifle rounds, which causes 30 Scorch on precision hits, and Sniper's Meditation, which gives stacking weapon bonuses, could be a good choice here too. For tips, firstly, there's a bugged interaction with Gunpowder Gamble not registering cooldowns correctly, which is why you might sometimes see that your GPG gets thrown and then instantly recharges itself. It's been in the game for a while, so I'm not entirely sure whether Bungie's okay with it, but as soon as your gunpowder gamble comes online, throw it, and you have to get at least 2 kills with it quickly, and it just recharges itself, ignoring the normal 7-second cooldown. Again, don't know if that's intentional or not, but it'll just happen sometimes in your gameplay, and free gunpowder gambles are never bad. And like the last build using Awakening, remember that the chain of kills and their element doesn't matter when spawning in an elemental pickup, only the final blow matters, and that kills in the chain were not kinetic weapons. For example, stasis kill, solar kill, fire sprays. Then solar kill, stasis shard. And the last tip I've got is that Faceted Mending will sometimes proc off the shatters from Duskfield, as it's supposed to, but it's not consistent, so I wouldn't recommend relying on this as a way of healing, just more a bonus of running that fragment that will sometimes go off. Again, not sure if this is something on Bungie's radar, so it will hopefully be adjusted in the future. And lastly, not so much a tip, but more of a PSA, I'm not sure when it got fixed, but if you're using Conditional, it now gets access to the anti-barrier given by Radiant, and it can break through a champ's shield in one shot, making it really efficient at dealing with barrier champs. And that's the build. I really hope you enjoy this build as much as I do. It's such a fun playstyle, and the build is so solid for loads of content in the game. If you want to see a full showcase of the build, there's a solo GM up on the channel, which is what you've been seeing in the background too, but it's more uncut and I do commentary over my thoughts in the GM and stuff like that. If you're keeping up the class item farms, best of luck, but for now, that's it from me. See ya.